Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, the Eagles lost to a Carson Wentz-less team tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Do they get their Super Bowl? Do they get our transferable Super Bowl?
Does Washington?
Yes, because we had the Super Bowl when we beat the Packers, and the Eagles haven't lost until now.
Right. And so Washington would get the interesting. Yeah, that's crazy. Washington has Minnesota's Super Bowl despite the fact that Minnesota beat them. Yeah. Plus, one could reasonably argue that this was Washington's Super Bowl, right? So, it really reinforces that. I think
it does. Of all dumb things, it does.
Yeah. Okay, now we've got some serious Super Bowl velocity because Washington is not going to finish the season without taking another loss. So that one's going to go around for a little bit.
The fighting Dan Snyders are not gonna run the table.
Yeah.
That is
finally some Super Bowl variety. Huh.
If anything, this Super Bowl season needed diversity in teams, and I'm glad we went to the team that we can get the most diversity out of, which is
famously known for its pro-diversity stance.
The fighting Dan Snyders. I feel like that should just be the name from here on out. Let's just call it that.
A lot more honest. Yeah.
Let's just be more honest about it. They're not the Commanders. They are indeed the fighting Dan Snyders. Excellent. Even after they get rid of Dan Snyder, we can still consider it. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are doing fantastic after that win against the Bills. I hope your blood pressure is back down to where it's supposed to be. There was a period of time after the game when I went to the grocery store and I was like, I don't know if I can think straight. I need to cook. I need to settle down. I need to cook. I can't get my brain to stop trying to figure out how the hell the Vikings won. But they did. And we have a lot to talk about as a result of this game. Also, we have a great mailbag and a little bit of history for you. So before we do any of that, again, thank you for listening to Norse Code. We are doing a live show this Thursday, November 17th, live show at Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota. It's a great venue. We've done it before there. Had a great time with the people who showed up. This is going to be fantastic. There's food. There's going to be drinks. We'll be doing a live show. We'll be taking questions. We'll be giving away 2 tickets to the game that's coming up this Sunday against the Cowboys. That is suddenly very, very interesting, considering the Cowboys just lost to the Packers. Who loses to the Packers this year? But they just lost to the Packers. And the Vikings just won their second Super Bowl of the year. So this is big. So, if you'd like 2 free tickets to the game, show up to Union 32 Craft House. We'll have a drawing for it once we are finished with the recording. But yeah, we'll be taking live questions. There'll be drinks afterwards. There'll be drinks during. And you can get your picture taken with the greatest framed jersey you will ever see of a Minnesota Vikings player. The Laquan Treadwell jersey will be in attendance and shown off prominently throughout the entire recording. So, we'll be starting about 7:30 p.m., roughly, making sure that all tech stuff and dumb stuff aside works. But about 7:30 is when we're expecting to start. The Packers game will probably be on in the background. We can all laugh at that. But November 17th, live show, Union 32 Craft House. We are really, really hoping to see some of you guys out there. And there may or may not be Luke Braun masks in attendance. So if they
who's
to say? If they do show up, I want to take a picture like The Shining, like the very end of The Shining, and just have that be surrounding, and have somebody in the middle. It'll be fantastic. So, Union 32 Craft House, November 17th, this coming Thursday. Show up. We're gonna have fun. It'll be in the corner, under the giant mirror. There's plenty of space for you. Come on out. If you'd like to donate to the show, if you'd like to support us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to the bonus material. You get access to the Discord, bunch of other stuff. Check it out over at patreon.com/NorseCode. I'm about to release another bonus episode. I think I'm going to do that on Thanksgiving just because, well, we're not going to put out an episode on Thanksgiving probably. So we'll have a bonus episode for you guys sitting there so you can listen to that while you drive to your reunions and listen to Arif curse.
That doesn't sound like me. I would never curse.
No, never. Absolutely not. We didn't curse at all last episode off air. Why would you think such a thing? Speaking of Patreon people, want to thank Kyle Slaby for upgrading his donation. However, he's asking for me to go onto Twitter and get a fake check mark, and I don't even think they do those right now. So
yeah, they're not selling them at the moment. So
yeah, but if they do, I could just label myself as Norse Code Podcast and then include parody in it too, just to cover all bases.
Yeah, you'd be fine.
Yeah, why would you take the Norse Code Twitter account seriously ever? Also, a thank you to Tanner Larson, who says who gave a donation on PayPal, which you can do at paypal.me/NorseCode. Thanks for entertaining me on my work commutes. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Tanner. So, PayPal, Patreon, and NorseCode.threadless.com, where today somebody bought an Arif sweatshirt. It looks fantastic. Hope that looks wonderful on you, whoever purchased that. But if you'd like an ugly sweater with Arif's face on it, which isn't to say Arif's ugly, but you will have a fine Christmas sweater with Arif's face on it. Check that out. We've got the original design as well over at NorseCode.threadless.com. Arif, we're done with the shilling. Let's get into a little bit of history. So, I like history. I'm a history buff. I know you enjoy the history of the game, the history of the world, and the history of crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, that is you. Let's just be. I more tend to veer to more crazy stuff than you do, or crazy more than you do. But let's talk about some crazy legacy stuff the Vikings have under their belt. Because this is a franchise that has a history of playing in games that don't seem to make any sense, are gigantic heartbreaks, or just everything that can go wrong does. And so what I did today was on our Discord and on our Twitter, I asked the listeners, what's the craziest memory you have of a Vikings regular season game?
Oh, goodness.
And boy, did we get some good ones here.
I bet. Oh my gosh.
Let's and I wanted regular season games throughout the history of the franchise, not just looking for the last couple of years or the Freeman gamers. I wanted some deep cuts in here, and I feel like we did. So let's go through the list that I got. There's a number of these I had to just quick fact check, but we've got some good stuff here. 2012. Week 17 against Green Bay. I remember that game. That was my son's first Vikings game. AP goes for the record. That's the one where he was not brought out for another couple of yards to break the rushing record. He runs for first down on the 2nd and 27. Wright ends up catching the duck. Ponder threw up. Packers had no timeouts to challenge. Green Bay fumbles the ball at the goal line, called a touchback for Minnesota. McCarthy threw a challenge flag, which should have been a penalty.
That's right.
And Vikings ball, but the ref said the challenge had already started in New York, so it didn't matter.
Right, but you still have to call, because that was called a penalty against the Lions. I think the very same year the Lions were called for a penalty for challenging a scoring play against, I want to say, the Houston Texans, when it was automatically reviewed.
Yeah. So Ponder ended up throwing a touchdown to Jenkins in the tightest window possible and connecting.
Something he's known for.
Yeah, Ponder was always the most accurate of QBs, and then,
especially in tight windows.
He won a lot of weird games against Green Bay.
Yeah, he did.
And then connecting on a long third down to end the game. So that was a crazy one. Let's go to 1981. The Vikings versus the Chargers at the Chargers. Tommy Kramer had a wild day, 33-31. 1992, Harbaugh throws a pick six to Todd Scott when they were up 20-0 in the fourth, and Ditka had a gigantic sideline tantrum. I believe they lost that game. 1987, the Vikings won 44-38 in OT against Dallas on Thanksgiving. 1975, Vikes down in the fourth quarter, block a punt for a safety to take a 1-point lead and score late to ice it against the Jets. 1975. 1976, at home against the Lions, Sammy White fumbled crossing the end zone. Lions lead late, but the Vikings pulled out a win. The 2000 Monday Night Football game against Green Bay, also known as the ball on his back game, where
iconic.
Brett Favre throws up a pass. It is broken up, but the ball never hits the ground. Instead, it ends up on the back of the defender, and the receiver for Green Bay picks it up and runs it in for a touchdown.
Yeah. That one lives in genetic memories now.
Yeah, that one. I remember watching that at the time, just staring. Just how is that even? Why is that even? And just some version of that for the next 10 minutes. Made no sense. 2010 versus the Cardinals. Down 14 and a drive stalled at the 1-yard line with 7 minutes left. Still tied. Went to OT and won. Both home games to start the 2011 season. Led 17 at the half and then 20 at the half. Lost both of them.
I remember that. They blew so many multi-score leads that year. Set a record for it. The Lions had their first multi-score comeback, I think, in a long time. Because of the 2011 Vikings. I think they broke it after they scored, I want to say it was 28 points against the Cardinals. And that was too much for the comeback gods.
Yeah.
They're not this Cardinals team, not that lead.
Vikings versus Bills, week 2, 2002. Vikings kicker Doug Breen missed 2 extra points and 2 field goals. So already going straight to my heart.
Perfect.
That cost the Vikings big time in a 45-39 loss to the Bills. The Vikings proceeded to cut him the next week.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
I
assume he went on to a near Hall of Fame career after that.
Joe Webb, the Tuesday night Eagle Slayer.
That game ruled because you had the Antoine Winfield.
Yep.
Fumble return because he had the sack, scoop, and score, right? That was all in one play. Jared Allen went off. In a game with Michael Vick, the other team's quarterback was the better scrambler. Just incredible stuff.
Joe Webb, the Tuesday night Eagle Slayer, and then 1998 Vikings Ravens. You'll notice a theme as we get closer to the end here. 98 Vikings Ravens, 3 kickoff touchdown returns in 1 quarter, including back-to-back. I remember that. Ravens turned the ball over on 4 consecutive drives. Gary Anderson hit 6 field goals, including breaking the field goal record for one season, and stayed perfect.
Yeah, and that's the whole Gary Anderson story.
Yep, nothing else happened. The Tebow game in Minnesota.
Yeah, that one was Marion Barber the one who ran out of bounds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Tebow game. Jim Marshall runs the wrong way for the touchdown in 1964 against the 49ers. One of the more famous plays in NFL history.
Yeah, the wrong way run, yeah.
Yep. 2018, Lambeau tie. Gross. And of course, that one was suggested by Luke. 1994, the Week 14 Bears at Vikings Thursday night thriller, where Chris Carter got a 65-yard TD from Warren Moon in overtime.
Wow, and that was back when overtime was any score wins, right?
Yep.
So, perfect.
Ravens 2009 game, where of all things, the Ravens lost because they missed the extra point, or they missed they missed a field goal to end the game.
Was that Billy Cundiff? Man. Okay.
That was a great game. For me, that was is this a team that we should really be paying attention to? Is Favre going to be any good? And then that happens. And then the next game was 2009, Favre to Greg Lewis.
That was the very next game.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
It was easy. It was easy as a Vikings fan to go all in that season.
Yeah. And that game, I think, is what did it for everybody.
Yeah.
Where they all decided, Greg Lewis, by the way, has been a coaching assistant for Andy Reid forever now. He was a wide receivers coach starting in 2012, bounced around the NFL. 2016 was the Eagles wide receiver coach. Moved with Andy Reid to the Kansas City Chiefs, was their wide receivers coach until 2020, and is now the running backs coach for Kansas City. So pretty cool.
Yeah. So Ravens 2009, Favre 2009 to Lewis, the Ravens 2021 overtime game. I'm including that in there as the placeholder for everything dumb that happened last year. So I'm not going through the list of games last year that we all like took leads and then lost or whatever. The Ravens 2021 overtime game is a perfect example of that season. That's it. I don't want to deal with it. And then we get to the Josh Freeman Monday Night Football game.
Which, that one's just in lore. Yeah.
Beauty personified. Most of that game is available on YouTube if you really want to watch it. Preserved.
You know how like a Hieronymus Bosch painting is like awe-inspiring in the way that it depicts all of these like grotesque happenings that evoke things like body horror and like what could possibly be in this artist's imagination. How am I feeling all these feelings? Truly one of the greatest artists to be kind of made famous and to have been produced. But it's just like all of this grotesqueness and ugliness that comes together to form something that has such a remarkable affect, such an important like impact on your psyche. Like it's so iconic. I feel like that kind of like rending apart of your emotions is what the Josh Freeman game was.
Yeah, it is. You really, if you've never seen it, it's worth going on YouTube and watching at least a few minutes of, just to get an idea of how terrible a game it was, not just for the Vikings, but for the Giants as well. And then finally, the game that most people seem to agree is the craziest Vikings experience was the Baltimore Ravens snow game in 2013, in which there were something like 4 lead changes in the last few minutes of the game.
Yeah, if you take a look at like, so if you go over to like ESPN, right, and to see like their score bug for the game, so they've got 2 scores in the first quarter. Now, so they list all of the extra point attempts on a separate line, which they don't do anymore. But they did back in like 2013, so it looks even crazier. So they have 2, quote unquote, 2 scores for Baltimore in the first quarter. It's actually 1, but they also include the extra point, right? Then you've got the field goal in the second quarter, and then a field goal in the third quarter. All right, it's 6-7. Baltimore's ahead as you enter the fourth quarter, and the game ends 29-26. So you got a Jerome Simpson pass from remember Matt Castle, right?
Oh yeah. Well, if we're gonna do remember people, remember Jerome Simpson.
Remember Jerome Simpson? Yeah. Remember Matt Castle? Remember Jerome Simpson? Yeah. So you've got that touchdown. But then they attempt a 2-point conversion to go up 7 instead of 6. They miss that. And then they have within like so that was at the 14 minutes. So that was at the top of the fourth quarter, and then with 2 minutes left, there is a Dennis Pitta 1-yard pass from Joe Flacco. They get the 2-point conversion to Torrey Smith, and then 1:45 left. Toby Gerhart, of all people, 41-yard run. So it goes from 12-15
broke
to
tackles
18-15.
And everything.
Yeah, absolutely wild. The Vikings make the extra point because Blair Walsh, I believe, was good in 2013. And then, so that's at 1:45. That play takes about 19 seconds by itself, right? So that's at 1:27. Immediately, Jacoby Jones returns a kickoff for 77 yards. Ravens are back up 22-19. And then 3 plays later, Cordero Patterson takes it to the house for 79 yards, 25-22. Then Marlon Brown, a 9-yard pass from Joe Flacco. And this doesn't include some of the bigger non-scores in the game, which include Cordero Patterson dropping back to pass, not seeing anything, and just like scrambling. Just like deciding, I'm just going to take this one. So yeah, just like wild stuff throughout the game. Patterson ended up with 141 receiving yards. I imagine 160 of his 141 receiving yards were after the catch. He had -20 air yards, I'm sure.
It was amazing and really comparable to what we saw in Buffalo this last weekend. It's why I wanted to mention it last, is because all of the craziness, especially at the end, really, really seemed to tie these two games together. I'm confident that the Buffalo game, as time goes on, will be considered a crazier game, especially and remembered fondly by Vikings fans because they were able to win. But make no bones about it, this was a game that should have ended 4 times. For both teams. For both teams.
Yeah, I mean, so like if you take out kind of like the moment, like how crazy the game was in terms of how it shifted and what it feels like and what the win probability. If you just take out like the context of the result, the game is memorable enough alone for a one catch that the top receiver from either team made, right? Like it's memorable enough for that. But then you also add in like 3 other Justin Jefferson catches, and then you add in the context of the catch, right? The Vikings are down. We're already within the 2 minutes. The Vikings, it's fourth and 18. It's not just fourth down. It's 4th and 18. The Vikings have to loft it deep downfield. It is just, Justin Jefferson's out of position. It's thrown way above him. Like all of the context of that catch makes it crazy. And like, that's like, sure, we'll probably remember that catch and that might be kind of the defining moment of the game. But that's not none of that is actually what made the game crazy. And that's what's wild to me.
So I mentioned the history because this game was crazier than all of those. It had a moment that in this game that was crazier than every single one of those. And then it had another. Like this game was absolutely nuts. And I only said regular season because it's hard to put anything up against the Minneapolis Miracle. But that said, this was a ridiculous game. And let's get into it. And the first thing you have to say is that Justin Jefferson was somebody you just could not defend. And it seemed like he was spurned on by watching the play of Stefon Diggs and going, anything you can do, I can do better.
Oh, absolutely. Because Diggs had a phenomenal game. 10 catches, 128 yards, 2 or 3 like highlight reel catches, including one catch that is up there with like the George Pickens catch this year, or the DeAndre Hopkins catch last year.
The one-handed catch where you sat there and just went, you couldn't even be mad. You were just sitting there like, oh, I remember when Diggs used to do that for us. Oh, yeah, he's still good. It was
beautiful. It was beautiful, right? And Justin Jefferson decided to one up it. I believe this was the highest receiving yardage a receiver has had all year, which is wild because Tyreek Hill, by the way, right now is on pace for 2,000 yards. Justin Jefferson now also on pace for 2,000 yards, which is crazier given that he had like a 14-yard game this season. but yeah, Jefferson ends up with like, 196 yards or something crazy like that. And what's really cool, so Next Gen Stats has like a completion probability thing, right? Where they take a look at, how far downfield the ball is thrown, the distance to the nearest defender, whether the quarterback is under pressure, how many defenders are near, how close you are to the sideline, whether you're throwing, middle, left, right. So they've got like all of these inputs, right? Over a dozen inputs that determine how likely it is that a receiver is going to catch a pass, right? And Jefferson had 9 receptions that had a sub 50% completion probability, which is the most in a single game by any receiver in the Next Gen Stats era, which I believe goes all the way back to 2016. So we're in I believe we're in the 7th year of data. We've had 6 years of data. No other player, so 9 is the most. No other player in that era has had more than 6.
It's ridiculous.
Highlight after highlight.
The man couldn't be stopped. It was brilliant. He could be stopped at the 1, but I've made the realization I've included a Justice tweet in nearly every episode this year, so I'm going to include this one. To quote Justice Mosqueda, the only thing that could stop Justin Jefferson is a Madden cover. Like this guy was everywhere. He was catching everything. It was truly remarkable to watch. Let's go through a couple of phases of the game because this was less about at times it was more about individual people, but like as the game went on, it became who was going to be stepping up and playing, who was going to be stepping up and finding the solution to the problem that was happening in front of them. The first drive the Vikings have, once again, was ridiculously successful, and guess who scored on it? Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, the Vikings are the best first drive team in the NFL. They did it against one of the best defenses in the NFL. I believe entering the game, the Bills were number 3, I want to say, in EPA per play, and they were number 2 or 3 by a number of measures, whether that's points per game allowed or points per drive or whatever you want to use. So, but the Vikings are just so good. I believe they've scored on 6 of 9. Nice opening drives with touchdowns, like crazy capability. And Jefferson have, like, I want to say on the opening drive, Jefferson may have had something like 40 yards.
Well, he had at least 2 catches on it because he had the first one where he turned around and managed to lose the defender, and then got the touchdown. So yeah, over 40 yards.
All right,
it was beautiful, brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bills went back and answered immediately because they're the Bills. They're one of the best offenses in the entire league. It immediately looked like this was going to end up being either A, a shootout, or B, it looked like the Bills were just going to be able to score at will, and it was going to be up to the Vikings to be able to keep up with it.
Right, because the Vikings have been we already know the Vikings have been somewhat inept outside of that opening drive and outside of kind of the final couple of drives, that middle chunk of where most of the game occurs. Yeah, the Vikings have been fairly impotent, right? Because you've got like 10 to 12 drives in the game, maybe 14 if it's crazy, or 8 if it's like a very slow game. Everyone's chewing up clock, right? And not being good on 6 to 8 of those drives, right, is pretty brutally bad for you. Which is kind of what it looked like was going to happen, right? Because the Vikings go 3 and out, right, following the Bills scoring drive. The Bills then drive for a touchdown again, right? And so now it's 14-7 because they have a 70-yard drive. So the Vikings don't even go 3 and out the next drive after that. They throw a pick, right? It's 2 plays, right? They don't even get the dignity of a third play, right? And so the Bills take that pick and they score a field goal, right? So the Vikings, after all of that, they're like, the Bills are up 17-10. The Vikings absolutely need an answer. They need to prove that they're in the game. They have a 5-minute drive, 5-minute and 41-second drive. And all they get is 46 yards and a field goal. But they're still in it, right? And then things get a little bit crazy, right? The Bills fumble after 7 plays, but the Vikings don't, really respond to it in the way that you want, right? Because they fumble right off of the, or they don't fumble. They have a 4 and out, right? Because they try to go for it on 4th and 1 at the Buffalo 28. That one doesn't work because they try to throw the ball to KJ Osborne. Christian Benford, I believe, just broke it up outright. Great game for him, except for all of the Justin Jefferson stuff. And then the Bills respond with a touchdown. Now it's 24-10 before the half.
So here's the other thing that's worth mentioning. The Bills were doing a pretty good job at that particular moment running the ball. And at the same time...
Which, by the way, the one weakness the Bills kind of had last year and somewhat have this year when you exclude Josh Allen from the equation, although they are better at this year, is running the ball. But they still were able to crack, like Devin Singletary had huge runs and
2 touchdowns.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, not a bad day for him. And Josh Allen was hitting receivers, but there were a couple of kind of questionable throws happening there. And the question all week was whether or not Josh Allen was going to play, how would his injury end up meaning something as far as the game was concerned if he did play. And there were a couple of kind of odd throws, a couple of dropped picks that could have ended these drives pretty early. And it was clear that he was playing well, but it wasn't all that sharp. Diggs was helping him a lot.
Yeah, it wasn't like consistent from play to play. Like, I believe, was it Shannon Sullivan earlier on had a dropped pick, I want to say?
Yes.
And there was like another one that was like a floater out there. But yeah, I mean, there were opportunities the Vikings, at least in this first half, didn't take very much advantage of in terms of punishing Josh Allen for some of the inaccurate throws. And Diggs is making some of these remarkable catches in part because he has to, right? Because the throws aren't as accurate as we're used to seeing from Allen. And so he's making up for it by just extending his catch radius and being a demon.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, the Bills are up 14 at the end of the half.
And Josh Allen is still, despite his injury, which is supposed to be worse if he, gets hit in any way there, was still scrambling and still burning the Vikings.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
He's really phenomenal. Like yeah, okay. So Daniel Jones and Lamar Jackson are like better runners. Justin Fields is turning into a better runner, but man, Josh Allen really knows how to hurt you. He had 84 yards rushing.
Somebody had compared him to Culpepper the other day and said that he was like Culpepper with like bigger hands. It's like maybe. So the Vikings end up going to the half, and it wasn't totally lost, but you had an expectation. The Vikings are down.
Especially because the Vikings have like the worst third quarters, right? They're like one of the worst third quarter teams in the NFL right now. They make up for it by being one of the best fourth quarter teams, right? So it's not like catastrophic, but like you're entering the third quarter and you're already down 14 points. Like it was not looking great.
No, things could be better. And
then they got worse.
Right,
because he threw because it's a 6-play interception drop for Dane Jackson, and that was with I want to say it was like 12 minutes left in the third quarter, and I thought the Vikings were done after that Dane Jackson pick.
That was one of the and I've watched a lot of Kirk Cousins football over the years. I've seen a lot of Kirk Cousins interceptions. That's easily number 1 or number 2 in the worst, not back-breaking, game-ending interceptions, but just for who it was thrown to, location, all that. That was number 1 or number 2, the worst Kirk Cousins interception of his Vikings career.
Yeah, I mean, because like when you see Cousins interception, sometimes it's just like Cousins thinks he's a different quarterback than he is. Like the Kevin King interception against Green Bay way back was that 2018 when Kirk Cousins first arrived. But you know the one I'm talking about, like in the corner of the end zone. And it's just like, well, Cousins, you're not a guy who's like throwing on the run into a tight window. That's just not who you are. So it's not going to work out for you, right? And it's like, okay, I understand that interception, right? It was like a bad throw, it was a bad decision, but you like kind of get it, right? Or some of like the interceptions that he's had that have just sailed, right? They've just sailed over receivers. He had actually the one to Christian Benford, right? It was sailed right over KJ Osborne. If KJ Osborne had never fallen down, that would have still been a pick, right? But this one is like, I guess, you know, there's some contact on the ball, but this one just like there was the accuracy was awful. You don't really know kind of what the decision was involved here. You know, he allowed defenders to kind of get in his face. It was a pretty bad interception. And then of course, on top of that, you just don't get the feeling that the Vikings have the ability to come back from it.
So the Vikings then came back.
Of all, it turns out
of all dumb things. watching Cook break that with Justin Jefferson doing an amazing job with the block.
Great block. Jeff Schwartz called it the wide receiver block of the year.
And you know what? Accurate. It looked perfect. Cook,
it was great. He finished. He threw a guy. He threw a guy into another guy.
This was the day that you didn't want to be on the other side of the field against Justin Jefferson. And this didn't just mean, you know, defending him. This meant trying to run past him. He was going to say no.
Yeah, he blocked a corner, but he blocked a safety because the safety is coming down to the box. So he blocks the safety and he blocks that safety into a linebacker. And so Cook just has like one guy to beat. And of course, it beats him, right? It's an 81-yard touchdown run. The thing is, if you take a look at the running backs don't matter win probability model, the Vikings had basically a 2% chance at that point, right before Cook, takes the ball. They have a 2% chance to win the game, right? Because Buffalo is up by 17 points at that point, right? Because they had scored a field goal on the previous drive following the Vikings interception. So Buffalo's up by 17 points. Cook takes the ball, 81-yard rush. But now, I mean, we're now in the kind of the middle of the third quarter, right? Or actually near the end of the third quarter. So we've got basically the fourth quarter ahead of us, and the Bills are up by 10 points, right? So the Vikings have changed their win probability from 2% to 7%. It's like, well, yeah, I guess you've doubled your win probability and then some. Like, that's great, but like that is minuscule. It's minuscule. Like, it was a great touchdown to watch, but like even watching it, I was like, I mean, that was nice. I don't know. That was nice. I don't know if we're going to get anything out of this, but that was nice.
It was a fun little moment to revive you. Like, hey, we're not totally out of this. Mm-hmm. There's a chance. It's small, but you remember that in the first half they showed that graphic saying that the Bills hadn't lost a 14-point lead since the 60s.
Oh, I mean, showing the graphic. I mean, that's shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, clearly. This is definitely the fault of Fox Sports.
Yeah, they penned the doom for the Bills there.
The fact that this happened, like, the Vikings Vikings fans have complained enough over the years on graphics like that appearing for Vikings games, and then immediately like, oh, the Vikings haven't lost in this, and then they lose, and then we were cursed by the thing. That happened to the Bills. That didn't happen to Minnesota this game.
And remember, so entering the game, we think of the Bills and the Vikings as like occupying these different zones, right? Because the Bills are a great team, right? And the Vikings are good and confusing, and we don't actually know kind of where to put the Vikings. I mean, the Vikings are 8-1, the Bills are 6-3, right? So it's not as if this has actualized, but like the way that people have been thinking about these two teams, right? But the Bills are the Vikings, right? The Bills have been the Vikings, right? They both lost 4 Super Bowls. They both have been cursed by like whatever things. Kickers haunt the Bills almost as much, if not more, than they haunt the Vikings, right? And they get screwed in the weirdest ways. They just happen to have an MVP quality quarterback right now. But when you have these two teams meet and you have all the weird stuff that happens when these two teams meet, which we didn't even cover in the history, but remember the game where the Vikings were favored by 18 points, and then right before the game, Everson Griffin gets arrested.
Yep.
Like that game.
Josh Allen goes out and destroys.
Yeah, and I guess he hurled a former UCLA linebacker. Not familiar with that, but but that one was a wild game, and it's only one part of it's only one part of the history of wild games that they've had. Luke Braun went over it, Minnesota Football Party, in our preview for the game, I believe, last Thursday. So there's a lot going on there, but the Bills and the Vikings are not so different, right?
This is
so when that graphic went up, and Vikings fans were like, "Well, I'm glad they didn't show that graphic for us because we'd be doomed." I imagine Bills fans were like, "Oh, okay, then. Yep. I guess this is how it is now."
This is just what's going to end up happening. Well, let's talk about their MVP candidate, who proceeded to march down the field after that, get themselves in a really good spot in the red zone, and then Patrick Peterson does this fun move where he proceeds to get his target on the he gets his target outside. So now he's outside of play, he's on the sideline. So he's ineligible, and then he cuts across quick in order to pick off Josh Allen. It was a fantastic move.
And Peterson was nice enough to kind of break it down. It was really cool. So after the game, he said, so he broke down both interceptions, right? And the one that he breaks down first is that fourth quarter, or is the red zone interception, which fine, or the overtime interception, which is like fine, great, fantastic. That one, he just talks about how, Josh Allen likes to trust his arm and stuff like that. But the one that really gets me is the way that he talks about that first interception, right? So they come out, they run a simple Dover scheme, a Dover concept with the number one receiver running the deep end, the tight end motioning over from the 3 receiver side to create a 2x2 to try and clear out the safety. So 2x2 is when you've got 2 receivers on either side of the offensive line. And he is talking about a receiver running basically a deeper route to clear out the safety to make it easier for the underneath receiver, in which case the tight end, who is motioning again from the 3 receiver side. So it's a 3x1, 3 receivers on one side, 1 receiver on the other side, to a 2x2, so 2 on each side, right? So that tight end motions over, and during that motion, he releases into his pattern. You've got the receiver running a deep out, and that deep out takes the safety, so there's room underneath for that tight end, right? So he knows that, and he also knows he's getting a guy out of bounds, right? And so he goes, so he says, where is it? We knew Allen loved to throw the ball in tight windows, so I just had to keep my eyes busy because I knew that my guy is out of bounds, so he's ineligible to touch the ball. So he starts floating over to Dawson Knox, who is running that running that route off of the motion to get underneath, right? And so he says, my understanding where the ball was being away from it, it's hard for the quarterback to throw it back into the field, right? So he's talking about a crossbody throw while you're on the move. It's always easier for the quarterback to throw the ball coming back into it. So I knew that. I just had to undercut the dig and sealed the game. Like that, I mean, This guy's so smart. Like the way he talks about all of these interceptions, he knows kind of exactly what he is attempting to do. And this, I think, was the hope, right? That when the Vikings put Patrick Peterson in a position where he's not always going to be manned up against all these receivers all the time, he's not going to be in press coverage all the time. The hope, even though it puts more stress on him athletically, is that when you get him in off coverage, especially in these zone looks that allow him to put his eyes on the quarterback, that he's able to use all of the knowledge that he's built about the game and all the instincts that he's built and all of his ability to make instant decisions, right? Like that guy's out of bounds. I don't have to worry about him, right? Like that is such a, like, that's true, right? But that is like such a difficult thing in the heat of the moment to be able to just actualize as part of your process for, because this ball comes out in like half a second, right? As part of your process for deciding how you're going to shift your coverage or move in your zone. That's really cool. So that first Peterson interception was like a work of art, right? So like,
and he nearly missed it. He was reaching for that one. He barely got it on his fingertips. And then he proceeded to run it back, and Josh Allen thought it would be a wise choice to try to tackle him with his shoulder and elbow.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, this is he doesn't. I mean, why would he? Why is it an issue for his elbow to be involved, James?
Why indeed? Well, the game keeps going, and the Vikings were able to bring it down the field, and as a big CJ Ham supporter who's been waiting for his role this year to be actualized in the way that your piece suggested it could, not that it would, but that it could, CJ Ham knocks it in from the 1 after a fantastic catch by Jefferson. They're able to get it in at the 1, CJ Ham, touchdown. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, so the Vikings are down by only 4 points at this point, and the Bills have the ball. The Bills get the ball back with 4:34 left, right? So they just have to string together a couple of first downs, and they've been able to do that basically all game at this point, and they'll win. And on that drive, they get -5 yards, right? Because they've got a short pass to Devin Singletary. Danielle Hunter takes care of that. They've got a penalty, right? So Stephon Diggs had a false start. So that moves them back 5 yards. Then you've got an incomplete to Diggs, another incomplete to Diggs, this time an incompletion, I believe, caused by Harrison Smith. Then it's 4th down, right? And the thing is, these incomplete, right? Because it's 2nd and 15. So they want to throw the ball. The Bills are a very pass-happy team. They want to throw the ball, right? Even though they're ahead. But it's 2nd and 15. They want to get that conversion because they know the conversions matter more in terms of draining the clock. But if it's an incompletion, it stops the clock. So you go from 4:28, right? And Devin Singletary gets the ball, and they go down, and they take the full clock. So the next snap happens at 3:45. That's a false start. So the next snap happens at 3:44 on 2nd and 15. That takes 4 seconds off the clock. So that's 3:40. Another incomplete that takes 4 more seconds off the clock. So the Bills have to punt with a stopped clock with 3:26 remaining, and the Vikings get the ball back.
It was insane. And what was fun about that, as far as Vikings are concerned, is that the defense held. And not like in a penalty boot, but like the defense held the same way it's held the last 2 games in situations where they absolutely needed to come together and make it so that the offense could come back.
Yeah, it was a pretty incredible performance, and we saw, I think, a lot from the defensive line that, for the first couple of games, the first 6 games, not even a couple of games, first 6 games of the season, we were worried that we were not going to see these kinds of performances. But around game 5, game 6, Dalvin Tomlinson really turns it on. Around game 7, you're seeing a lot more Danielle Hunter. Za'Darius Smith is always playing really well. We're seeing some pretty good stuff from Harrison Phillips, but the entire defensive line is now playing a lot better, and they're playing a really big role in, pressuring Josh Allen into throwing these picks or, peeling off of coverage in order to tackle a running back who's catching in the flat. They're so good now at recognizing screen passes, right? Like whether or not they're actually good at stopping screen passes, the Vikings still have a little bit of work to do, but the defensive line has become so great at recognizing them, which is such a big part of helping stop them, that, you can have these drives that last like all of 1 minute and get you the ball back with a stopped clock. And the thing is, the Vikings response drive, it just like, it's well, obviously it doesn't end well, but there's just so many moments at the drive that you think that they're not going to be able to get anywhere because remember there were 2 sacks in that drive, right? Because they had they convert on 2nd and 5 to Adam Thielen over the middle, right? But on the next series, they've got Kirk Cousins gets sacked by Boogie Basham, right, for 3 yards. Then they throw an incompletion to TJ Hawkinson. Then he gets sacked again by Von Miller for 5 yards, so third and 13. And then it's 4th and 18 right at the 2-minute warning. And I don't know, did something interesting happen then?
So, and that was the thing. Von Miller he'd been harassing, but he hadn't gotten anywhere near Cousins the whole game until that moment. Von Miller was a non-factor.
Yeah, I mean, he was able to get a little bit of pressure. I believe he had like 5 pressures, but he didn't have a sack. He didn't have a quarterback hit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the Vikings were doing a pretty good job. You know, again, Brian O'Neill, Christian Darrisaw have been having really excellent seasons. And yeah, I mean, Von Miller obviously knows like much like Jared Allen would find ways to generate sacks, you know, in the fourth quarter. You know, Von Miller knows how to kind of time and set up opponents so that his best moves come late in the game. So obviously, like, it's not shocking that that sort of thing happens, but it is interesting that the Vikings were able to make sure that Von Miller was a relative non-factor until, you know, it came to that point in 3rd and 13, a 5-yard sack. I mean, virtually the game is over.
Yeah.
4th and 18 coming out of the 2-minute warning. Brutal.
And Darrisaw was out at this point with a concussion. So it was, there was even less experience out there. Now, earlier in the game, Stefon Diggs proceeded to make a one-handed circus catch that was incredibly impressive. It looked like the ball was way over his head. It looked to be not remotely catchable. He comes down with it, saves the drive for the Bills earlier in the game. So now it is 4th down and a mile. Cousins drops back. He tosses it in the direction of Justin Jefferson. The defender,
general area code.
The defender proceeds to get 2 hands on the ball, and Justin Jefferson comes down with it. And the best part about this is watching the reaction, because this is on the Vikings sideline, watching the reaction of anyone on that sideline who saw that Jefferson came down with it. It was like just losing their minds.
I think Sam Ekstrom tweeted that like one treat, because he tweeted out he quote tweeted a video, right? And he was like, one treat that you can have watching this video is pick a person standing the Viking sideline and watch their reaction. And you can get 30, 40 views out of that, right? Great tweet, good idea, fantastic, right? But yeah, I mean, how could you not lose your mind watching something like that?
I watched it. The thing I saw was that the defender had hands on it, and I went, you know what? They tried. They really put it in the hands, attempted to put it in the hands of their best player, didn't come down with it. They tried. I'm cool with the loss. The Vikings did a hell of a job today. And then he gets up with the ball, and they show the replay that somehow he managed to not have the ball hit the ground when he took the ball away. Just like, oh my.
Yeah,
this is nuts.
That's like the crazy thing. And the thing is, earlier, I mean, on Saturday, actually, we saw Ohio State play, and Marvin Harrison Jr. had one of the craziest catches. I don't know if you saw, I did tweet out one of the screenshots from it, but I did end up seeing the video of his ability to just kind of contort and get his foot, because it's college, right? You only need one foot, to get his foot down on the field in bounds in order to get that catch and make it count. And it was just like, wow, that's crazy. It's one of the most athletic catches I've ever seen. It's crazy that it happened with a college player. I mean, the fact that it is a Marvin Harrison Jr., might help explain some of the things there, but it was just like crazy. And then we see this Justin Jefferson catch, and it's just like, because the defenders are going for a pick, there is some element where it feels like it's defying physics, right? Where the ball is finding a way to kind of float above the field. So there's something like ethereal about it, right? There's something surreal about it, but that is a pick, right? Justin Jefferson is playing defense. He is knocking the ball out of that guy's hands, except he's not. It's 4th down. You can't play defense. If you knock the ball out of that guy's hands, that's a turnover, right? It's a turnover on downs. The guy, I mean, I understand why he's going for a pick, right? It is 4th down, but I understand why he's going for a pick. He's a defensive back, right? He wants the pick. truly marvelous catch, right? Like his back is parallel to the ground. Like when with his arms still fighting, right? Like this is before, he comes down. His back is parallel to the ground while his arm is still fighting the two other hands in the air. Yeah, absolutely remarkable, incredible strength. Like this is actually, we were talking about this, I don't know, 4 episodes ago, about how Justin Jefferson has this insane underrated strength, right? Because he's kind of a wiry guy. It does not look like he is built, and he has this crazy strength that helps inform all of his like remarkable yards after the catch, his ability to create 5 yards when most receivers will get 1. Like he just like powers through people in ways that are fairly subtle and not easy to understand, because he's not like lifting people up and throwing them around. He's not like running people over in the same way, but the amount of strength that he just has, absolutely wild. Phenomenal catch.
It was the game saver. And one that
the context of the catch important too.
Yeah. This kept it going. The Vikings were able to move the ball down the field. They made it. It looked like it could have been a touchdown. Justin Jefferson was not. And Kirk Cousins found himself in a situation. Well, before we do the Kirk Cousins sneak, Dalvin Cook was lined up for a run and was pushed back several yards. And it turned out that there were 12 men on the field that just weren't called.
Yeah, that was, and that's one where the NFL like came out and just said, "are bad," right? Which, it doesn't feel better after the fact, but it's always nice when they do that versus when they stick by the officials, clearly incorrect ruling on the field. They very rarely say, "should have caught that," but they did say it. They did say, "should have caught that." So
it would be the first of many that they should have called or taken a closer look at.
Indeed.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much else to say other than the fact that the refs missed it. And Kirk Cousins finds himself on the 1. The half-yard mark. And attempts is the wrong word. But he participates in a quarterback sneak in which he doesn't really move forward. And CJ Ham, bless his heart, tried his best, but only pushed him forward and to the left. And Cousins was not able to outstretch to get the score.
Yeah, instead Cousins' shoulder hits the ground before he can. Yeah, someone mentioned that it's like kind of difficult to imagine Cousins actually put a cleat in the ground in order to move forward. It was so like he like fell forward-ish, kind of flopped on the QB sneak. And then like CJ Ham was like watching this and is just like, all right, well, I'm just going to lead block from behind, I guess. He tries to turn this into something which by the way, the Vikings were already at 4th and 1 the play prior, right? But there was a penalty on Jordan Phillips for defensive offsides. So the Vikings are actually at the half-yard line. Like this is 4 quarterback sneaks. This is a remarkably easy one. And does not happen.
No,
right? And you just 50 seconds left. Doesn't happen.
And at this point, I was just happy it wasn't Ed Ingram's foot that caused the problem, because right. Twice during the game, once during, I believe, this series, Ed Ingram's foot ended up stepping on Kirk Cousins' foot, causing him to flop backwards.
Yeah, he had a 3-yard loss, I think, with like 109 left, I want to say. Like in this series, he had a 3-yard loss because he had stepped on Ed Ingram's foot.
Just remarkable. And I think it was in the first series of the game that Ed Ingram's foot played a large part in the play. We're just like, really? Yeah, this is what we're doing? That ended up to Cook.
That was the one where he's like falling to the ground and he like throws it backwards, and everyone is like, take the sack, my dude.
Yeah, like, Cook got it, but Cook didn't want it.
Yeah, no one's happy here.
It's rare when a running back goes, no. I don't want this touch. I don't need to be fed again.
Yeah, so, just take the sack.
Turnover on downs. Game is over, according to the tweet that came out by the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, well, 46 seconds left. You're up by 4. The Vikings are, I don't want to say out of timeouts, right? Because they've got, two left. I want to say one left.
One.
Not enough. Yeah, they've got one left. Not enough, right? They've got one left. And so the Bills have basically two options. Now, mind you, didn't do it, but they've basically two options, right? One is they could kneel right there, and then that would be a safety, right? And if they kneel and it's a safety, then it is 25-27, right? So the Minnesota has 25 points. They need to drive all the way down the field. I shouldn't say all the way down the field because this is a free kick, not a kickoff, right? But it's a free kick, and which does give you a little bit better field position than on a kickoff, generally speaking. But it'd be 25-27. The Bills have the lead, and presumably on this imaginary safety that they take about 20 seconds off the clock. If they're lucky, probably more like 11. And the Vikings have to drive down the field for a field goal. That is an option, right? The other option is the one that I think every coach in this scenario would choose, and I think I would actually too. They just need 1 or 2 yards, and then they can kneel. But they can't kneel where they are because it's a safety. They need 1 or 2 yards. And the Bills have been running well all game, and they've got this tank, which I believe I called him a himbo tank. That's the stuff of nightmares for Eric Kendricks. But they've got like this guy who is like a puppy dog made out of steel, right? Like he's going to get you a yard. And so that's all they need. So they're in the weird situation where with 99 yards of field in front of them, they quarterback sneak basically, right? Or they seemingly, that is one of the options they give themselves. Who knows? Because they fumble the snap.
And according to the stat, not since the 70s has this been a thing in the NFL. A touchdown occurs because of a fumble at the goal line during the quarterback sneak. Eric Kendricks comes up with it. And we all expect, maybe that's a safety. Nope. It was an actual fumble. It was clear on the replay. Dropped between his legs. Kendricks comes up with it. The Vikings score and are now ahead.
Absolute wild scenario, right? Vikings are up 30-27 after that because they make the kick, right? Absolute wild scenario. So there's 39 seconds left for the Buffalo Bills to try and they could win the game, right? They could have a drive that wins the game, right? Because they're down by 3. If they score a touchdown, they win by 4. Or they could play for a field goal tie and send it into overtime. But absolutely wild. The Bills had so no win probability calculator goes to 100 until the game clock. But everyone that gives you like decimals, right, will tell you like 99.9 or 99.99% chance that the Bills win the game, right? Because the odds of a fumble in that scenario, like you said, goes back to the 70s. The odds of fumble in that scenario are so small to be non-existent, right?
You can ask your friends, their friends, their friends, and their friends. They've never seen it. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there's no way to like 46 seconds left. You have the lead in the ball. They have one timeout. That's it. You run one play that takes their timeout away from them. That play is presumably at least 6 seconds, and then you kneel, and that's 40 seconds. You win. That's it. That's why the Bills social media team tweeted it out. Of course.
And then the Vikings took the lead and kicked off to the Bills, proceeded to play prevent defense, and put the Bills in a position to kick a field goal in order to tie it into overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Prevent.
The Bills had because the Vikings kick it to the Buffalo 5 to induce a return. So the Bills actually have the ball at the 20, not at the 25, right? Because the Vikings have been very good about kickoffs and special teams. They've been getting a bunch of hidden yards all year on special teams for stuff like this, right? And so kind of a high risk, high reward thing, but the Vikings have been so consistent about it that they actually don't actually see the downside of it very often, which is what occurs here. So the Buffalo Bills have, if they want a touchdown, they've got 80 yards to drive. But if they want to get within field goal range, they probably want to get to the Minnesota 35, right? And so that's 30 plus another 15. That's about 45 yards that they need to get over the course of the next 35 seconds. And it is the Bills. They've already done that this year. And we kind of expect them to have the capability to do that because of who the quarterback is and who their top wide receiver is. I remember a bunch of people tweeted out, hey, if there's any time for Stephon Diggs to have a miracle, it would be now, which is both true and also disrespectful to the magnitude of the miracle, because this is a regular season game. But still, I understand it. But then the Bills have a 12-yard play, an 8-yard play, a 20-yard play, a 15-yard play, and then you've got an Andrew Booth defensive pass interference. Gabe Davis, it's another 14 yards.
Hey, they finally called pass interference. They hadn't been calling that for most of the day, despite Hawkinson getting mugged.
Absolutely mugged. Absolutely mugged. One of those where it's like very clear, like you would use that to train officials on what pass interference looks like. Like that's how pass interference it was. They didn't do it. But the Bills, the Bills drive the yards that they need to drive, right? They drive, I believe, 70 yards, maybe 69 nice yards, secure the field goal, and send it into overtime.
And who do the Vikings send out for such an important coin flip?
They sent out CJ Ham.
They sent out Captain Ham, a man you can trust for the coin flip. And the Vikings get it.
They're right. Yeah, the Vikings get it.
Vikings get it. The Vikings march down. Vikings tried desperately to score a touchdown, could not. They get a field goal. Now it's time for Josh Allen to move the ball down the field again.
By the way, they did get another defensive pass interference on this drive against Justin Jefferson for another 19 yards. That did occur. So they did start calling pass interference on the final drive against in favor of Buffalo. And then they're like, oh, this is a flag that is available to us that can allow us to affect the game. Yes. And so they did actually call a pass interference in overtime.
Let us start calling this pass interference. Yes. Let's do this. And indeed they did. There's a play in overtime, pass to Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins gets smoked, but he tosses it where Jefferson can get it, toe tap, and get out. And watching the all 22 of that, watching the replay is just astonishing. Like, there's real trust in that Jefferson's just going to come down with it.
Yeah. I believe it was Ed Oliver who cleaned Cousins' clock on that play. But yeah, 2nd and 1, they're like any modern NFL team. They throw it on 2nd and 1, and they get it to Jefferson, who ends up running out of bounds for 13 or so yards. But yeah, gorgeous. It was really phenomenal.
And Josh Allen proceeds to drive down the field, makes it not quite to the red zone. He's about 24, 25. Mm-hmm. He tosses it, and Patrick Peterson says no. He stops it, runs out of the end zone with the interception, realizes he doesn't have to go any further, lays down on the field to end the game. What a turnaround. The Vikings, win or lose, you couldn't call them frauds anymore, but the Vikings are for real.
That's the feeling, right? You can't argue it, right? You just it feels like you're taking crazy pills if you're arguing that the Vikings are not for real, right? And here's the thing, right? The arguments that you put forth about kind of who the Vikings are and how they play are rooted in basically, if you play a close game against a team, you're probably as good as that team. That's usually what that means. Well, this game went into overtime. The Buffalo Bills are top 3 in most people's power rankings, right? Yep. They were, right? So in theory, this would mean the Vikings are just as good as the Bills, right? Now, I think that you can make the cynics argument. In fact, I almost start to make the cynics argument in my piece after the game, my after action report, basically, where it's just well, you can talk about how, Josh Allen had a really remarkably bad second half, and maybe that's, informed by the fact that his elbow doesn't work. I feel like we all forgot that part. That seems like a really important element to the way we evaluate Josh Allen's play. And yeah, you could say all that, right? You could talk about how the Vikings, maybe they didn't go up against a backup quarterback, but they had the backup quarterback Juju going for them. But they blanked out Von Miller, right? They survived 2 interceptions. They were able to deal with a remarkably talented secondary, an injured one, but a remarkably talented secondary, right? There is a Vikings team that you can't trust. that team is going to show up, right? Probably in the playoffs when it hurts the most, right? They're the Vikings team that you can't trust. But at the moment, that you can't see that team. That team doesn't seem to exist. It won't materialize until later, right? This team right now is one that feels very team of destiny, right? If we want to use that phrase, and certainly has the capability to hold their own against high level teams, right? And what's interesting is that the team that they couldn't hold their own against, the one team, the Eagles, just got boat raced, right? They just got beaten by the Washington Commanders of all people, who the Vikings just beat, right? So like, yeah, very interesting vibes. The Vikings are, you could say they're tied for the first seed. The Eagles do hold the tiebreaker, obviously. So there's that. But if the Eagles drop into the game and the Vikings don't, obviously that means that the Vikings are the number one seed, which means that they're the only team in the NFC with a bye, which would be crazy to cover, because at the beginning of the season, we're talking about, hey, man, maybe you can right the ship. Like maybe you can put the Vikings on a path where they seem like they could make some noise. And now we're talking about, yeah, they could be the number one seed. They have the best record in football, man. Who knows?
What's crazy, after the game, I was sitting like trying to rationalize it. I was trying to like, is it that the Vikings were like playing well, or did we just drag Buffalo down to our level? Like, no, you are going to sit and deal with us. You haven't given up more than 20-ish a game. We're going to put up 33. You are being brought down to our level. Our type of football is this dumb stuff that happens in the fourth quarter where we're going to eke it out. We're going to cause you and your fans to deal with what we've had to deal with for 50 years.
Yeah, right. Dude, if you want to like if you want to swim in the muck's here. Water's warm, man. Get in.
It's getting into the argument with the pig. The pig enjoys it, and you get dirty. Like this is exactly what's happening. It's beautiful. Yeah. We brought you down to our level, and now you have to have some serious staring into the void moments. Did people who were in attendance compared the sound after that Patrick Peterson interception to what happened in the Saints playoff game when Kyle Rudolph did not push off, in quotations, to beat the Saints in that playoff game? Like all of a sudden the Superdome is quiet as a tomb. It was like that. It was quiet, that quickly done.
I mean, the Bills are maybe not so much this year, but the Bills have become a team that just like gets it done, right? It gets stuff done, right? And you know, early on when Josh Allen was bad, right? It was a very like, I don't know about this team, man. They're kind of backing their way into the playoffs. They're going to get crushed in the playoffs, which is what happened, right? But you know, they just got stuff done, right? Right now, the Vikings are doing that too, and so are, I guess, the Giants and the Jets, who the Bills also lost to. There's a bunch of like teams where you're just like, man, this is happening. I guess we're dealing with like, you know, if the Vikings end up, you know, in a Giants game, right? That's going to be absolutely wild, right? Especially in the fourth quarter. But yeah, I don't know. Like there's something about this team where it's like, well, okay, well now it very much seems like they've got the ability to hang with a high level team. Maybe, you know, that Cowboys game looks a lot more delicious, especially after, you know, Dak Prescott did not, you know, turn himself into a world beater against the Packers.
Cowboys are favored according to Vegas in that.
But that makes sense, right? Because it's not the last game that Vegas looks at. It's the balance of the season. Yep. They might wait, you know, game. And the Vikings for the balance of the season have been messy. The Cowboys for the balance of the season have the second or third best, along with the Bills, the second or third best defense in football, right? And Dak Prescott, for most of his career, has been a fairly high-level quarterback, right? His ceiling, when he accesses it, has been higher than Kirk Cousins. So I get it. I think Vegas is doing their due diligence, and they're largely like correct. And maybe, you know, next week we'll talk about how, hey, one fluky win against a team that we all consider to be good does not tell you that the team is good if the fundamentals underneath are a little bit rotten. Maybe that's the conversation we want to have with the Cowboys. But right now, it is so when we were coming off of that Green Bay game at the beginning of the season, I think it felt very similar, right? Because at the time we thought Green Bay was good.
Yeah.
And we're just like, man, I don't know. This team's pretty good. We could talk about this. This team sounds like fun. And now the team's having fun. I don't know. It's interesting. It's much more difficult to have these discussions, right? Because if you want to talk about how, hey, you're not going to keep getting those fourth quarter turnovers, at some point, people are going to look at you and be like, yeah. Are you sure, man?
Yeah. Well, and now the Bills are staring down a third place. They're in third place in the NFC or in the AFC East.
They were at the beginning of the season, and fairly so. They were favorites to win the Super, more than the Chiefs, to win the Super Bowl. Right?
This is wild. They are now in third place behind the Dolphins, which we beat, minus Tua not being there, and the Jets, who we will be playing here in a couple of weeks.
Who I don't know. I guess we could stop calling teams paper tigers. I guess the Vikings will have to take the Jets pretty seriously because who knows what teams get up to these days, man.
I mean, the Jets beat Buffalo, so these are two Buffalo beaters. Like what can you do?
Yeah.
So all of this ridiculousness happened. We're going to get into some individual play here in a moment. We don't have any mailbag questions necessarily on Cousins at this point. This was not a great game to start by Cousins. Cousins ended up kind of figuring it out as the game went on, and it appeared to just trust that Justin Jefferson was just going to come down with it.
Right, which is, again, not a Cousins that we're very used to seeing. In fact, the quarterback that we expected the Bills to play is the quarterback that has a profound trust in his receivers, notably Stephon Diggs, right? We expected that the Vikings would be playing against Case Keenum. Case Keenum is that guy. He'll throw contested catches. He loves trusting his receivers. He figures they're going to be somewhere in the general vicinity of where he wants to throw if he can't see them. And, we want Cousins, who's very structured, textbook quarterback, to have a little bit of Case Keenum. Not enough where you're like, bro, I don't know about that interception, but enough that there is something to that level of trust. Now, what's interesting is that if you take a look at the ESPN total QBR, right, which eliminates a good chunk of the yards after the catch, it eliminates garbage time. It primarily looks at expected points per play, and it tries to attribute to the quarterback what has historically been attributed. Cousins had a bad game, right? 34.5 in QBR, which is the 0 to 100 scale. And Josh Allen had a very good game, 69.2. 50 is supposed to be average. And yeah, Cousins threw one touchdown. He threw 2 picks. He took 4 sacks. He caused some negative runs by just throwing the ball backwards, right? Yeah, there's a lot of problem in Cousins' game. He had like a 60% completion rate, so it's not even the type of game that we're used to seeing from him, where you've got these really high completion percentages, and they resulted like some pretty great numbers, especially the yardage per attempt numbers that everyone likes to focus on because they historically track with what happens. But then a lot of it comes in 3rd and 8, and he throws a 7-yard pass, and you're like, well, okay, I mean, yeah, you improved your numbers, that's good, I guess, but we're punting, so great. We're all happy about that. Kirk Cousins ended up with a 50.1 PFF grade in the game. All of this is like fair, right? But it doesn't feel true to the spirit of what happened,
It was a nuts game. And we're going to get into the mailbag. We've got plenty of questions. We're going to try to get through as many of them as we can here. Ingram's left foot asks, why do I keep getting in the way?
Because you're attached to a player who is not yet talented.
Not yet talented. I like that. Damian Barrett asks, historically, this team hasn't been great the week following an emotional win. What will our hopes be, in what way will our hopes be dashed against the Cowboys to reinforce the belief that the Vikings are not to be trusted?
I feel like they've had a lot of emotional wins this year. They keep winning. So I don't know.
That's kind of the thing, though, is that, the Minneapolis Miracle happened at the very end of the season in the playoffs. Meanwhile, this has happened, week 10? The Vikings could crap the bed here and still be fine for the rest of the year. In 2009, there was a stinker of a game. Despite the fact the Vikings were playing very well up until that point, they had a stinker of a game against the Cardinals. and they lost. They lost
Yeah.
terribly. They still
Yeah, I
like
remember that.
rebounded the next week and were able to win. But like, this is something that's, if we're going to stumble a little bit, let's do it now and get like, and be able to handle whatever's going to happen in the playoffs. We're in a situation where the Vikings are 4 wins or Packers 4 losses or some combination to clinch the North. Like the magic number is 4. It just finished week 10. All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.
So yeah, that's the state of the Vikings.
Just ridiculous. Kenneth Allen asks, what do you make of Eric Eager's argument that the Vikings are this year's version of the 2021 Rams? Does that volatility give you any hope the Vikings might make it past the divisional round?
Eric's argument is that the Rams were playing an unsustainable brand of football, but it was working for them because they were such a high volatility team. Now, remember, at the end of the season, the Rams were playing the same kind of football that they've been playing at the beginning of that season, but were throwing a fair number of picks that they hadn't been throwing before, but were kind of a natural, including a number of pick sixes, that were kind of a natural consequence of Matthew Stafford's style of play melded with all of the things that the Rams are, right? But they still got into the playoffs and they played high volatility football. They were able to overcome, some opponents that were playing, pretty high level football on a more consistent basis that were less volatile. And the benefit to being that team is the only way you beat a better team is by basically rolling better dice, right? And if you've got a wider range of outcomes available to you because of a high volatility style of play, right? It's the playoffs, right? A loss is if you play the most consistent game possible against a superior opponent, you'll lose by a little bit, but you still lose. And a loss is a loss, especially in the playoffs. And so if you play to either get a blowout or be blown out, that improves your odds of winning, even if it also improves your odds of that loss looking worse. So you want, if you're an underdog, a high volatility style of play. And that year, the Rams were underdogs. They were underdogs to both the Packers and the Buccaneers, and I'm sure some other teams. But the Rams were not. Matthew Stafford through the first 9 weeks was an MVP candidate, and then he stopped being one for a pretty good reason, right? All these picks, right?
All those pick sixes.
All the pick sixes, right? And so, they need to be a team that when they're up against, somebody like, that Buccaneers team that still has that offensive line that is still playing some, I guess they're playing pretty high level defense right now, but was still playing some high level defense. Tom Brady was doing some stuff. You cannot let the most frequent outcome define the game for you. You cannot let what is most likely to happen. And so you need to kind of shift the dice. You gotta weight the dice in a way that gives you either 1s or 6s instead of 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. And so that's what the Rams had to do, and that's what they did. And they ended up winning a Super Bowl that way. To some extent, the Bengals were kind of the same way, so it was kind of fun to see a Super Bowl kind of produced in that way. But here, the Vikings are not, I think, the most talented team in the playoffs, right? If we did the playoff seating right now, I think that would be the Eagles or the Cowboys, right? I think that the Vikings would need to be able to overcome those teams. But if you play a higher volatility style of play, you're more likely to be able to overcome those teams. And Cousins is kind of doing that. It's the one thing that has bothered me about him is that he doesn't when it's time to kind of dig oneself out of a hole. The way that you played already to get into that hole, 90% of the time is not going to get you out of the hole, right? Football is weird, so there is that other 10%, but 90% of the time is not going to get you out of the hole. So you need to play a different way. You need to adjust your style of play for the scoreboard, which he never did, right? And he would never really scramble, stop, throw, and run, or scramble, stop, pretend to run, then throw the ball, right? Like that kind of improvisation was not really in the way that he played. Now he's doing that kind of stuff. Now he's playing higher volatility football. Now he's trusting that Justin Jefferson is like somewhere near the sideline in between the 15 to 17 yard mark. I'm sure he'll figure it out once I throw it up, right? You didn't do that stuff. So in that sense, it does kind of match what the Rams were doing. Obviously, from a team building perspective, the Vikings are not giving up first round pick after first round pick after first round pick, right? In order to grab or acquire players, they shopped a lot of bargains, honestly, and they got a lot out of people like Zadarius Smith. But yeah, I think that there's an argument that they're very similar to that 2020 Rams. It does help, of course, that they have the Rams' former offensive coordinator, and then the guy who helped design the defense that the Rams use, plus the guy who coached, I think, with the Rams special teams group. There's a lot of Rams, the Rams strength and conditioning, or I shouldn't say strength and conditioning guys, sports science guys. All of that adds to they're the Rams kind of feeling.
Yeah, and you know what? We'll take it. It seems to be successful so far, so why not? J. Rue Cart asks, the 3rd and 4th and 1 calls, both shots well beyond the yard needed. They did something similar earlier in the year. Why not run and call some quick route call?
So a lot of times when those are called, they call 2 or 3 plays in the huddle. And if you don't get the look that you want, you kill it and you go to the other play. And in those cases, the Vikings got the look that they wanted. They just didn't execute, right? And if the issue is execution and not, hey, we made a poor strategic decision that was going to, because if you take a look at the shots, I mean, if they get the look that they want, let's say Cousins is passing, because he had a 60% completion rate. Let's say all his completions were successes, all of his incompletions were failures. So let's say he has a 60% success rate, generally speaking. If he throws that ball against a random defense, his success rate is going to go down. It's below a 60% play. But if it's the look that you want, if it's Justin Jefferson one-on-one, right? Or I guess in this case, we had a KJ Osborne one. But if it's the look that you want and your receiver can beat the other guy across from him one-on-one, it's no longer a 60% proposition. It's a much higher proposition, which automatically puts you ahead of the likelihood of converting on 4th and 1 on the ground. So there is a logic to it. And I don't think that they go into these 4th downs with the deep shot as like the only way they're going to help resolve it. But if the deep shot is there, they just want to take it. So that's kind of why that happens. They do have a call at the line of scrimmage to call for either a running play or a shallower depth of target for its receivers.
He's just unlocking his inner Case Keenum.
Yeah.
Which, in this particular case, is not a bad thing. Sean asks, is there any evidence that can prove the case that this insane Jefferson catch was better than the OBJ catch? Something like catch probability, proximity to defenders, etc.?
So we don't have the catch probability, I don't think, unless somebody has it. I don't think we have the catch probability in the Odell Beckham catch because the Odell Beckham catch was before. Let me take a look because Odell Beckham came out in the 2014 draft class, and that was like his rookie year, right? Yeah, it looks like it was. So this is before we have next gen stats, completion probability stuff. To Beckham's credit, which you don't need to do because the catch does kind of speak for itself, but to Beckham's credit, he was interfered with. Like that was not like a ticky-tack case. Like that was the Dallas Cowboys were interfering with this pass, right? And he still was able to catch it. But I think that the physical proximity of the defender in the Viking situation does ramp it up quite a bit because you're fighting for the ball. You've only got the one hand. You're basically making the same pose as Odell Beckham did. Your back is a little bit flatter in comparison to the ground, which makes it harder, not easier. And that it's more like a George Pickens catch in that case. But you're fighting with like none of these scenarios is the ball being contested, right? When we're talking about some of these catches that this reminds us of, the ball isn't really being contested. So you can make the argument that this is more impressive, right? Because he has to rip the ball away from somebody who got two hands on it, as opposed to the ball was just overthrown and I have to adjust. I say just, right? But it is all very impressive. So yeah. There's an argument. There's also another argument you can say like, hey, if it were not for a defensive back trying to get an interception unnecessarily on 4th down, a thing that we see a lot, if not for that, the ball would have hit the ground or something. You can say that, right? Yeah. It makes sense for you to say, hey, there is an element here that is a little bit easier. But I think overall, you can make the argument that even though we're accounting for that, you have to also account for the beginning of the catch, which is much more difficult to pull off. So I don't know that there's statistical evidence to that, but I think that you can make the argument.
Vikings Jack asks, By most statistical measures, Kirk is having a worse season than last year, and yet he seems to be playing in a way that produces a higher ceiling, and to my mind makes it more likely that we win against better teams in the playoffs. Are the results blinding me, or am I onto something?
Both. The results are blinding you. Kirk Cousins needs to play better football more consistently if the Vikings want to win. That does not mean he should stop taking risks, but the risks have to be mediated with the style of play that gives the Vikings a high floor, right? And you only need to dig into the risk assessment or the risk version of Kirk Cousins, right? When you're down and your consistent game isn't working. So in that sense, yeah, I think you're blinded. But in the sense of like, Kirk Cousins is playing a higher volatility style of football, and it is paying off. And so, in that way, you can make the argument that this is like a different Kirk Cousins, and this is like not, the one that we're used to seeing. And there is a level of volatility, just like I described in the Rams example, that allows you to be a little bit more comfortable, right, with the idea that Cousins can show up to a playoff game against a quarterback that is better than him. And on that day, in that game, he happens to put together a better performance, right? And that's what you're asking for volatility for quarterbacks who are underdogs. You want consistency from your quarterback favorites, and you want volatility from the quarterback underdogs, because that's how you knock off a better player. So there is something there, but I think, it is Cousins is not playing as well as he should be, right? And the Vikings are getting away with it. That's not always going to happen. So I don't know that you can say Cousins is playing the high volatility style of football that enables these wins, because you still want a high floor after all of that.
I enjoy the fact that he broke Luke's chaos meter this game.
That was funny. That was funny.
Absolutely broke it. Let's go down to Tommy Gunn, who asks, is it time to grab Nessie and break the glass? Boy.
Yeah. People are getting pretty dangerously optimistic.
It's about time to break the shotgun out. The optimism shotgun. A lot of you people are a little too excited, myself included. This is
You're definitely in that group.
Yeah. This is getting a little crazy here. Mike asks, what's your assessment of how Thielen and Osborne are playing? A lot of Vikings Twitter seems to be down on them lately. Also, was the Kirk sneak a good call? Why not use Ham as a lead blocker for Cook?
Well, I already said Ham decided to lead block from behind, so I don't see the issue there. No, I think Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne are playing well. I don't know. I've said this a couple of times now. I think that if you take a look at, like, if you find a way to look at the All-22, which I believe is still on NFL Plus, and you only take a look at the snaps that like Adam Thielen's playing and seeing what Adam Thielen is doing, you would be impressed at how often he gets open. Plus, like, he can still catch the ball really well. So I don't know. I think actually Adam Thielen's playing well. I think KJ Osborne's playing well.
Next question's from Glad90, who asks, which did James celebrate more, the fumble in the end zone or the Here's Ham touchdown?
Good question, James.
It's obviously the Here's Ham touchdown. I was actually in the kitchen when the fumble happened. I could still see the TV, but I wasn't like close to the TV to see it. I just saw that there was a mistake, and my son was watching the game and like lost his mind at the fact that there was a fumble. So I ran over. What are you talking about? Oh my God, they lost it. Fantastic. Yeah. I enjoyed that.
You're never going to be able to convince your son to leave a game early to beat the traffic now.
Never. No, never. And the fact that I was wearing the Ham jersey at the same time the Ham touchdown happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
That had to happen. Beef Brewski asks, Arif, one of the Vikings was asked why they're better able to handle the close games this year, and they used the phrase situational football. Is there any fire to this smoke? Are the Vikings better at situational football this year? Or is this simply a football guy word for luck?
Yes and no. So the issue with talking about luck-based events in football is when we talk about it, especially in the ways that when we discuss things like regression and stuff like that, we very rarely talk about the process by which that occurs, right? Because it is not an easy skill to pick up a lot of these things that we're talking about. It's not easy to score in the red zone, right? It's not easy to recover an NFL fumble on a consistent basis, right? It's not easy to force an NFL fumble. It's not easy to be positive or positive in a huge way in the takeaway margin, right? These are not easy things, right? You have to work at them. But the problem is that there is a cap on how good at those things that you can be. It requires a lot of work for you to get there. And once you decide that, hey, we have a problem recovering fumbles, if you ask an analytics guy, like, hey, so this team has been recovering, 33% of their fumbles this year, right? And so they're leaving a lot on the table. They're losing in the turnover margin. An analytics guy might say, I'm not saying all analytics people are like this, but an analytics guy might say, or a guy who follows analytics on Twitter, maybe that's a better way to put it, right? Because the guys who do analytics departments, girls, right, in analytics departments interface very often with coaches, and so they might have a different understanding of it. But you ask somebody, who follows kind of the analytics discourse, they might say, well, that's just kind of regress. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And for a fan, that's true, right? And for a commentator, that might be true. But the thing is, when you have a fumbling problem, you start working on fumbles, and now your fumbling problem goes away. Maybe you were bad at recovering fumbles. Maybe, whatever technique gets in, because, we take a look at it and we think, there's a scrum in here and there's not much technique involved. But maybe, in the same way that like jiu-jitsu and wrestling is technical, very technical, right? Even though it looks just like a mess, right? It could be very much that, recovering a fumble requires a certain level of technique and talent, but there's a cap on how much technique and talent and how much coaching you can get involved in there. And once you reach that, you're back at 50%, but you were below that before, and now you're back at 50%. And so there is a coaching element potentially to a lot of these things. Hey, we're bad at red zone. We're going to practice a ton of red zone. Now we're better at red zone, right? It's not that these things magically resolve themselves. And that's not even what we're saying when we talk about regression. It's not that a team who's been bad in the red zone, without any additional focus on red zone stuff, will necessarily get better in the red zone. But that's just not what teams do. When they get bad at the red zone, they practice it. And so the process by which teams get back up to average is what regression is, right? It is not always by happenstance or by the law of large numbers. And so when it comes to, the Vikings practicing situational football a lot more, the phrase Kevin O'Connell keeps on using is situational masters, right? He wants the team, if you presented somebody on the team with a random scenario, you're down 1 point, 4 minutes left, you've got 3 timeouts, you've got the ball on your own 20, what are the things that you need to be aware of? Well, you need to be aware of where the first down markers are when you're on your side of the field. So initially, you want to be able to advance the ball in any means necessary. And, you'll probably be passing the ball a little bit more, even though it creates the possibility of an incompletion or whatever, because the clock is not as important as you're down a couple of scores or down a couple of points on your way. But by the time you cross the 50, now you have to start thinking, all right, well, we're down 2 points. So a field goal wins the game for us, but we don't want to give them a response drive. So now we're going to throw in a bunch of runs, maybe some short passes. We want to stay in bounds. Before we wanted to get out of bounds, right? Because we want to, preserve a clock in case we can't, get it. We have to punt, and we need to preserve clock for their comeback drive. Now we're past the 50, right? Now we might kick a field goal. So now we need to drain as much clock as possible, right? And so he wants every player on the field to be aware of all of the factors involved in situational football. There's a limit to how much that's going to help you. And I think the Vikings are beyond that. And I think that they are, benefiting a little bit from luck, because I don't think these other teams are full of people who are not aware of what to do in these situations, right? There is something to the way the Vikings have drilled their players, and maybe it is distinct from the ways that the Vikings did it under the Zimmer era, although I kind of doubt it, given how much Zimmer would talk about practicing situational football in practice, right? But there is something to it. I think that when you are being coached, right? If you're coached on fumble recovery and then you recover a fumble, it is impossible for you not to think that played a role, and it probably did, right? If you're a running back, you get the ball and you run downfield and you're up by 2 points or whatever, or you're down by 1 point, and you run and you realize while you're running, right? You realize there's a minute left on the clock, and you go down at the 2, right? You're going to think, I knew to go down at the 2 because I was coached 3 weeks ago in this exact scenario that I should go down at the 2 because a field goal is going to win the game for us. What's more important right now is that clock, and so I'm going to go down at the 2, right? And you might be right. It might be because of that coaching, but you could, if you're not right, you might attribute it to something else. You might attribute it to, hey man, I saw Maurice Jones-Drew do that like 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whenever it was, right? You remember that, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or why did he score? He shouldn't have scored. Yeah.
I think that was Brandon Jacobs, right?
Last year. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so like, you might attribute it to coaching, but you might have done the same thing and attributed it to something else. But there's a primacy effect, right? Where you can't test what would have occurred in the opposite scenario. And so you refer to the thing that is most likely to be in your brain at that moment for that reason. And so now you've anchored the reason, even though maybe you were smart enough to go down, right? Maybe you have absorbed all of this football discourse. Hey, we're down by 2. All we need is a field goal to win. I'm going to go down at the 2, right? Maybe you already know all that, right? But you were coached on it 3 weeks ago. You're going to talk about the coaching. So there is a little bit of everything involved here. I don't know if football guy for the word luck is correct, although that is what it translates into when we're an outside analyst. So I want to kind of get that out there because I don't want to diminish how important this coaching can be, but I do want to cast like a critical eye on referring to coaching as like the reasoning behind all of this.
Well, we've got some questions on Greg Joseph. Let's just get them both out of here at the same time. Jake asks, as the number 1 Greg Joseph defender, I believe Greg Joseph used his clairvoyance to know Chandon Sullivan would commit PI inside the 5-yard line on the final Bills drive of the game, therefore missing the extra point, so the Bills kick a field goal instead of going for it twice. Inside of the 5, he also managed to doink it once again to prove his accuracy. Is there any possible way this isn't the case? So there's that, and then there's one more. Tanner asks, did Greg Joseph intentionally miss the point after so that our offense would be more motivated to drive down to the half-yard line to give our defense the opportunity to assuredly score the touchdown because Greg is an avid listener of the North Code podcast and heard Arif say that teams perform better when down by 4 points rather than down by 3? Because he did the inverse against the Saints, missed the extra point to keep the Vikings up by 3, so the Saints didn't stay aggressive enough to go for the touchdown. Should we be giving Greg more credit? I don't think it's possible to give Greg Joseph any more credit than these 2 messages.
That's 5 head. That's so much. That's so much.
That's meet me at the docks kind of like conspiracy theory. That's Greg Joseph anon.
So for people who want a bit of a refresher, Greg Joseph misses the extra point after the CJ Ham touchdown, which had he made the extra point would have put the Vikings down by 3. So it'd be 24-27, right? But the problem, I shouldn't, but whatever. So the problem here is if the Bills score and get an extra point, that's it. Like if they get a touchdown and an extra point, that's it, right? Because then it's 11, right? And so now the Vikings not only have to get a field goal, but they also have to get a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, right? That is a substantially different ask than a 10-point game. And you would rather, right? And so I guess you could say that Greg Joseph has clairvoyance, but if he has that kind of clairvoyance, I'm sorry, what is he doing with a kicker salary?
Yeah,
he should just be in Vegas. You'd make way more money than and probably not get clocked on every occasional play, right? Like kickers are protected a lot, but sometimes on a kickoff coverage you get decked. That's just going to happen.
What a weird, yeah.
I would rather be wined and dined on the casino's bill, right? The casino's paying for me to get money from them. I would way better. Unless he has very specific clairvoyance powers that are enabled by the nature of the field. We will not get into that. This is not a witchcraft podcast. I promise you, it's not a witchcraft podcast. Please stop asking me witchcraft questions.
Well, that request always goes well. I can't wait to see what the mailbag next week's going to look like. Or rather,
there's no way it would be. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, next Thursday's mailbag, which will be performed live at the Union 32 Craft House.
Oh God,
we'll see how that goes. Timothy Cox asks, how did that over/under of 2.5 touchdowns for players with less than 5 letters in their last name work out? All hail the Ham.
All right, so we have touchdowns from Davis, from Cook, from Ham. That's it. So yeah, we just hit the over because we did not get a Diggs touchdown, right?
Nope.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So cool. Not how I would have drawn it up, but yeah, we hit the over.
Yeah, it works. Kirko Chains on a Plane asks, for the Witchcraft Corner. The Salem trials occurred in 1692. With it being the year...
What?
Yep, this is where we're going. The Salem trials occurred in 1692. With it being the year 2022, 2022 minus 1692 is 330. Does this finally mathematically prove that the score being 33-30, that we can finally close the case that there was significant witch vibes at play?
What's the next question, James?
That's from Ben Greenhagen, who asks, for Reef's Moon Corner, as an actual lunar scientist, and I went to his profile, and that's
I did too.
Yeah.
I did, and he tweets out like technical work from NASA about planetary bodies, and yeah, and I checked the tweet locations, and it's close to an observatory. Like okay, so this lunar scientist, what does he have to...
For Reef's Moon Corner, as an actual lunar scientist, I'm dismayed by Reef's discussion last week. Clearly, lunar strange energies link Viking Super Bowl appearances
come on!
to moon rocks returned by the U.S. and the Soviets from 1969 to 1976. It faded. How can Artemis ensure that the Vikings have long-term success?
Artemis being one of the many... gods associated with the moon. Sorry. Okay, I'm Googling this right now. PhD planetary science.
We're at the point now of instead of being angry at the questions, he's angry at the question askers. He's now Googling.
Yeah, you're getting doxxed on podcast. Let's see what's going on, man. No. Oh, he's even more qualified than I thought.
Oh, yep. Well, here we are.
Oh, God. Oh, and he's handsome. God, Jesus. He's a PhD in planetology from UCLA. He's had it for years. I've never sounded so defeated about a guy with a PhD. This is rough, Ben. First of all, why are you even listening to this podcast? Second,
please continue to listen to this podcast. Third,
okay, so the United States and the Soviets returned rocks from the moon, lunar rocks, if you will, and that emitted strange energies purportedly. Okay, so here's the problem. The problem, Ben, is that you're thinking too much like a material scientist, right? You're thinking too much about properties emitted from rocks, right? From objects, right? And the problem is that these objects are merely avatars, they're totems, right? It's kind of like how Gandalf has a staff, right? Now, obviously, I'm referring to a fictional magical universe. Take it with a grain of salt when I discuss the moon magic, which obviously is real. Now, Gandalf does not need the staff, but it focuses kind of his magic, right? It operates as a conduit for the energy that he has, right? Now, the lunar rocks operated as a conduit for, maybe Artemis, right, or Luna, or any number of other moon-related deities. Now, there was like a moon. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. That's all. That I'm not going to. That's almost blasphemous, in a way that I don't want to be, despite what I'm saying now. So, uh, those operated as a means of channeling energy from the moon to the earth through practitioners, right? Through very much adult witches, right? Not baby witches, people who are experienced in magic and drawing energies from the moon. And as a scientist, I can understand why you would invest in an amount of importance from the energy radiating from these physical objects, but that is just a byproduct of the process by which you draw energy from the moon. Now, as people have been moving away from these particular conduits, it may seem like you don't have these strange energies anymore. And certainly, if you measure the rocks themselves, yeah, you won't, right? But that's because they've been distributed through a number of other totems that don't necessarily have to come from the moon themselves. That's why people got mad at the baby witches on Witch Talk, because it was messing with all of these other distributed mechanisms to deal with the moon energies coming from the moon. Sorry, I'm sometimes I listen to myself.
And you just have to stop. Is that usually during this show or during the football party?
I don't say sentences like this on the football party. Suffice to say, I'm going to go to bed angry tonight at me.
Well, let's go over to Ricardo, who says, on Sunday, I attended the Vikings game. My wife was homesick with our 2 kids, ages 4 and 2. I left the game.
Oh my God.
After the missed extra point to make sure I would get home to help with dinner and bedtime. Am I the greatest father to ever live or a total fool? If the former, should I expect a statue? If the latter, should I for a statue?
Okay, so a fool, but not because you missed the turnaround of the game. In fact, Vikings fans will thank you. It's obviously because of you. Rather, the problem here is that you might accidentally be committing your kids who may have watched the game, I don't know, to a life of Vikings fandom by giving them a high profile win at a moment where the kids can connect you to the Vikings, right? That's the issue. Also, obviously, your wife might be upset that you left at all. I don't know. I don't know what the dynamic is here, but I feel like there's kind of a question that you left at all. But I don't know. Maybe you paid a lot for the tickets in advance and your wife was like, please go. And then you came back early. And what a magnanimous gesture. You helped with dinner. That's fantastic. But the problem is the long-term ramifications on your kids. And so that makes you the fool. Not because you missed the game, because if you had stayed, the Vikings wouldn't have won, obviously. Right. So you were not in a position where you would have been there to enjoy Vikings victory. That's just how that works. The problem is, think of the children, man. Think of the children. They might become Vikings fans because of that selfish act to leave. Selfish act to prepare dinner for your wife.
Yes, the absolutely. Why would you do such a thing? Clearly,
I cannot believe you.
And let's go down that route, because R. Menson asks for a Reef's anti-sustainability corner.
Oh, Jesus.
Why does a Reef continue to claim that sustainability is not achievable for the Vikings? Does he just hate the concept of sustainability and is pro-global warming? Is it because he hates children so much that he wants the world destroyed before they can live out their full lives?
Okay, well, first of all, I reject the premise of the second question, because sustainability has nothing to do with my hatred of children. Anyway, I very much believe in preserving a livable Earth, primarily because I live on the Earth. The fact that these little toddlers that get sick all the time and are annoying and turn into, worst of all, eventually turn into teenagers. That is just an unfortunate consequence of wanting to create a livable planet. That's a con, right? You list the pros and cons. Hey, pros, you get to eat and live on a planet. That seems pretty cool. Cons, so do teenagers, right? I think that's fair. So that has nothing to do with it. first of all, sustainability is like a cheap lie in order for you to be able to feel comfortable in living the lifestyle that you live, with the level of decadence that you live, with the amount of waste that you theoretically no longer produce, but the amount of extraction that comes from that waste will, or maybe not waste. Let's say you reduce waste, but the amount of extraction that is required for you to live at that level of decadence and luxury globally comes from somewhere else where they don't get to have kind of the same benefits. Now, that is not necessarily an implication on you. I'm recording a podcast, right? Like I can't, it is not a moral, but there is something about sustainability being used to paper over the moral consequences of our lifestyles and the actions that we live, in order for us not to see kind of the consequences of the way that the way that we want to live has an impact on the rest of the world, and the hidden environmental costs of things like shipping, of things like landfill usage, of things like poor manufacturing practices, of things like cheap products, right? And sustainability can get you some of the way there, but it's like trying to improve gas efficiency or mileage in order to reduce the amount of emissions. You cannot reduce you cannot create a car whose miles per hour are so good that it is good for the environment or net neutral for the environment to produce a car, right? That's what sustainability is. And that's my issue with the Vikings, is that they pillage the third world for the luxury that they have at US Bank Stadium.
Wow. I was wondering how you were going to tie that in, and you somehow found a way.
Yeah, I 100% nailed it. No one could question that. That was a smooth transition.
Yes. Minneapolis Cinnamon Cheerios asks, Kirk Cousins now has 1,999 passing yards this season. If this Vikings team were a Woodstock 99 act, which one would it be?
This is you, James.
Let's see. Of all the people who played at Woodstock 99, I'm going to go with The Offspring. While they had a couple of newer hits that they were playing, they had a lot of older songs, a lot of veteran songs that were tried and true and tested. And probably one of the more wholesome acts out there, who literally stopped the show at one point to say, hey, you guys need to back up. You're killing each other out there. Also, please stop assaulting the girls at the show. You guys need to stop, or we're going to stop. So they had a moral compass, which I think
Fair.
Cousins would be the sort of person who, if he was going to rock out, would be say rock out, but you guys need to be careful and don't be dumb out there. So that's my thought anyway. As far as the band, let's go to Don from Ohio. Let's end this. We're going to take some of the questions that we missed and put them into Thursday's show. But Don from Ohio asks, I'm convinced certain athletes are created differently than other humans. I'm convinced that players like Josh Allen, Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Derrick Henry, etc. are mutants. All have uncanny abilities that set them apart from others. However, all mutants have weaknesses. In most cases, they let their emotions get the best of them. Look at Moss. Definite mutant, hence the nickname the Freak. Then there's Jefferson. He has no flaws. Very similar to Brady. I'm convinced he took the super soldier serum a la Captain America. Outside of being brainwashed, there are no weaknesses involved with him. None. So, which Hall of Famers would you consider mutants, and which ones would you consider super soldiers?
I'm going to skip over the idea that Justin Jefferson doesn't have any weaknesses, or that Tom Brady doesn't. I get where you're going, but I'm just going to skip over that. Okay, fine. Let's accept the premise of this question. I'm going to take a look at Vikings Hall of Famers. I think Pro Football Reference has all of them, question mark?
Well, I've got the list.
Okay.
So
just throw it at me and we can go by one by one.
Chris Carter.
Super soldier.
Chris Dolman.
Oh, mutant, 100%.
Carl Eller.
Mutant.
Jim Finks, general manager, not necessarily player.
Doesn't count.
Bud Grant, however, we're going to include.
Super soldier.
Paul Krause.
Mutant.
Steve Hutchison.
Super soldier.
Randall McDaniel.
A super soldier. Easy.
Randy Moss, we basically covered that one. Ellen Page.
Super Soldier.
John Randall.
Mutant. Easy. Not close.
Fran Tarkington.
Mutant.
Mick Tinglehoff.
Oh, man, that one's close, but mutant.
Ron Yeri.
Mutant.
And Gary Zimmerman.
That one's also close. Mutant.
And just for sake of argument, because he belongs, Jared Allen.
Mutant.
There's no answer. No. That dude couldn't be any more of a mutant if he tried. He literally came out on a horse.
Easy. 100%.
All right, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, we've got the live show on Thursday over at the Union 32 Craft House. Be there. Show should start at 7:30. Drinks, food, all of that. 2 free tickets over to the Cowboys game. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So over at ProFootballNetwork.com, you can find my Extra Points column, which covers Justin Jefferson's place among receivers, whether or not he is like a top 1 or a top 3 receiver, and kind of what goes into that consideration. I talk a little bit about how the 49ers are designing an interesting offense. It's an all-yak offense. They break a bunch of tackles. I think people are familiar with that. I talked a little bit about Tom Brady, whether or not he is back, or whether or not we're going to trick ourselves by the end of the season into thinking that he's back based on his schedule. I talked a little bit about Jeff Saturday. I've also got some upcoming pieces. I'm going to be updating the quarterback power rankings over at the Pro Football Network. And I don't know what my piece on Wednesday is going to be, but, it's fun. It's usually a good piece every week. So check those out. I've also got a couple of game recaps, including the Vikings game recap. And I already forgot which other game I recapped. Doesn't matter. It's all good. I did phenomenal work this week, as always.
And you can trust him because he hates children.
Yeah. I mean, I regret that we must leave a better world for them. That is an unfortunate truth.
Teenagers. Sorry. Teenagers are the things.
I also hate children. I just hate teenagers more.
You go.
Let's be clear. Yeah.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back live on Thursday, so check us out. But for Arif, my name is James, and please remember that this is not sustainable. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.